I know I said earlier that the introductions would be short because the bios are printed to keep things moving along, but I have to say I'm really honored and pleased to have Jayme Lemke with us today. Jayme's a former student of mine, and it's always a pleasure and honor when one of your students comes and does so well. And so, Jayme, welcome back. I'm glad to see you. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Go for it.
All right, thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be here with you today. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to share with you all some of what I've learned about freedom from thinking about women's economic rights in American history. So I want to go through and offer some ideas on three separate questions in this brief time we have together this morning. The first, what are economic rights? The second, how have women's economic rights changed over time in the American experience? And finally, just a few thoughts, and we can talk about this in the Q&A also if folks are interested, but what can we learn from this history that might help other groups that are currently held back by political oppression or other restrictions on their economic freedom? So first, what are economic rights? I'm defining economic rights in this case as, do you have the ability to make decisions for yourself about how your life's going to go? How are you going to use your resources, including your time and your energy, your physical efforts, as well as physical and material resources? Can you take advantage of financial capital, land, and all those kinds of things as well? So the critical question here is really, who is planning your life? And I'm a scholar in the Hayek program, so I can't give a presentation without including a quote from Hayek. So I'll offer here one from Constitution of Liberty. Coercion occurs when one man's actions are made to serve another man's will. In this case, we're talking about coercion occurring when one woman's actions are made to serve other men's wills, as has so often been the case in political and legal institutions in the American experience, in the British experience, and really around the world. So what we're asking today when we're thinking about women's economic rights is, what are the legal circumstances, what are the political institutions where women are actually the ones who are the drivers? They're in the driver's seat instead of being limited to having the role of voice in the passenger seat. Okay, so this is Sir William Blackstone, so knighted for his excellent legal scholarship in the 18th century. His treatise, Commentaries on the Law of England, became the foundation for English law as well as for much of American law. And so here William Blackstone is defining the family law tradition, and he's defining it through this idea of coverture. So this is the idea that has very old religious roots, very well adhered to within the common law as well, that when a man and a woman marry, they become a single legal entity that has a single legal voice. And the husband is the one who is given that legal voice. So what this means in practical terms, since a husband and wife are legally considered one, married women cannot independently own their own land, homes, or businesses. You do see things like widows taking over the family business. That happens quite a lot in early British and American history. But while you're married, you can't keep any wages you earn. You can't sign contracts. That's a really important one in many ways for thinking about being able to become involved in any kind of significant business venture. If a woman did sign a contract in this period of time and her husband decided after the fact that he didn't think the terms were so great, he could actually come around and nullify it. So it would not be legally binding without his permission. So this put women at a real inability because basically their word doesn't have legal bond in the same way that men in the economy were able to offer. They can't stand up for themselves in court, and they can't write a will. This is very important also if you think about this idea of being able to create something for your family, for the next generation, being a big drive for a lot of people in terms of what they want to create out of their life. This inability to write your own will as a married woman kind of deprives you of that option. Also, this is all compounded by the fact that you can't exercise your own economic rights. You have to filter them all through your husband. And if he's a bit of a clod about it, And if he's not very good at about taking your interests into account, or maybe even worse, mistreating or abusing you, there's no exit option. So divorce is nearly impossible. In Britain in the 18th century, you would have to go to Parliament. Many states also full-on forbid it as well, unless there is clear proven adultery or desertion. Otherwise, you're out of luck. And by the way, the only criteria that works if you're a woman is you have to wait to be deserted. It doesn't matter if your husband cheats on you. You have to wait to be deserted, and you have to wait 7 years. That's 7 years without formal legal recognition. But one of the things that is so fascinating and wonderful about American history is you have these strong patriarchal legal institutions that over the course of a single century fade away. They just blow away in the wind. And if you look at this map, the darker the state is colored in, the earlier that state legally protected women's ability to own separate property within marriage and to keep anything that they earned during their marriage. So you'll see a lot of early reform in the industrialized Northeast. You'll also see some reform through the center of the frontier that is a little surprisingly early, given that when we're talking over here about Colorado, Nevada, Kansas, we're looking at changes happening in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, time periods when these states were just forming, when they were not particularly well populated, but yet they're still going out of their way to protect women's rights. So what I want to do is look a little bit at this history and look a little bit at this experience and try to understand, okay, how do we overturn centuries upon centuries worth of legal tradition in such a short period of time? And you take a group that's currently being denied this critical set of economic rights that's going to enable them to decide how to use their time and how to use their energy, and we're going to completely reform that in a century. That's amazing. If that's a recipe that we could figure out and translate to other parts of the world and to other oppressed groups, what a blessing that would be. Okay, so my big question, which I put in 115-point font to emphasize its magnitude, how did so much change? And the first idea I want to emphasize is that new opportunities to work outside the home resulted in women gaining respect, skills, and influence. So when we're talking American history, what were those opportunities? All right. This is the first step in creating cloth in the 17th and early 18th centuries. So textiles would have been manufactured in what's called cottage industry, where you'd have the women in a family or the women in a small community working together. They're just at the beginning here. They're taking wool that they've shorn and spinning it into thread. So this is always manufacturing that women have been the primary workers within this productive task. But it was a very long, slow, arduous process, low productivity per hour. This is what creating cloth looks like in the 1820s. So America first gets fully vertically integrated textile mills by gift of Francis Cabot Lowell and a group of other industrialists who steal technology from Britain through industrial espionage, bring it to the United States. I'm oversimplifying a huge history, by the way, and I'm doing it in front of Doug Irwin, which has me nervous. But this is the big overarching picture. And so now this woman right here, she's actually working on technology that's a little bit more 1850s, 1860s, so it's a little bit more advanced. But even the first forms of these large looms quadrupled women's productivity per hour. Quadrupled. The very first time these factories open. That means that you have this resource, your time, your labor effort, and it's now immediately, overnight, 4 times as valuable as it was before. So what happens? Information about the fact that there's this entirely new source of income for these women who up to this point in time are predominantly farming, starts to spread and filter through the countryside through a variety of different mechanisms, and I'll go over just a couple of them. But in addition to the income to be earned at these factories, another thing that's widely advertised and communicated is how much of a unique educational and social opportunity these mills are providing for the young women who go to work in them. And the way that this educational and social opportunity manifests is that previously you've been living in small rural farming communities. Now you get to participate in this brand new, previously unimagined activity of moving to the big city to take a job. Now, today we do it all the time. That was far, far from common in the early 19th century. So this is, this quote you're reading here, this is an excerpt from a magazine. This is a magazine that's completely written, edited, distributed by women who worked in the textile mills. They tended to be ready for education. They tended to be of the more adventurous spirit because remember, these are the women who are choosing to leave the farm and to take these first new, exciting, weird jobs. And so these women write stories in these magazines that get circulated about just all the opportunities that exist in these new factory towns. But all the communication is not left up to the women themselves, although a little bit of it is, as you'll see here on the left. So I want to go through kind of two mechanisms here that this information about this new opportunity and this new way to use your productivity gets transmitted. One is writing back home. So this is a letter from one of the mill workers, Orilla Varney. She writes back to her sister who still lives in upstate New York. She says, I am well suited here and I'm doing first rate. I can make more than 2 or 3 of us could in Peru, New York. And at any business that I've ever followed yet. Earlier in the letter, she references how poor the wages are for teachers, which was what she had originally trained and thought she would be doing. She says, weaving's all right. I guess you and Harriet had better come to Lowell and get rich with the rest of us, 16,000 girls here. And the reason why she ever went to Lowell to start this job in the first place was that a recruiter, like this one who advertised in Paulson's American Daily Advertiser, had come to her town, and he had educated her and her family on the fact that moving to the city was not something that was going to ruin her, but instead was a valuable, productive opportunity. You have these young women who put brothers and future husbands through medical school and law school. They save up to fill their own bank accounts. There are banks that emerge to take single women's deposits. Again, this is before they get married, before those property rights limitations kick in. So this whole industry kind of pops up to try to make these industrial urban centers, these jurisdictions in the northeastern part of the country, more attractive to women, more palatable to women. And the last thing I want to say here is that this desire to all of a sudden appeal to women, and especially appeal to them through the mechanism of their productive capacity and their economic opportunity, is something new. Because previously most of women's production was tied to family production and again, cottage industry, small scale local production. So women having this economic potential really sets in motion a dramatic shift that kicks off many of the legal changes that do come to protect women's economic rights. Basically, the legislators in these states, in order to compete in the industrial playing field, have to revise the way they are thinking about women and their economic potential. Okay, a second important lesson from this American experience, American history, is that having a choice in law is critical. So one of the reasons that reform takes place so quickly in the United States and in American history is that you actually see state and territorial governments directly, obviously, explicitly competing with each other to try to make their jurisdictions more appealing to women. Okay, so this is just a short overview of what it looks like to get around the United States in the 19th century. Not easy, as we know. You know, we've probably all encountered the game Oregon Trail. I know I played it in school. I don't know if anybody else did. But these rates of travel to get to New York, if you had 3 days, you could maybe get down to DC where I live. You could travel, within a pretty narrow range. By 1930, the United States has constructed a massive transcontinental rail system that allows you to get from New York to California and many locations in between in just 3 days' time. So what this means, the speed of transit, and this transcontinental rail network is bolstered also by regional rail networks, particularly in the Northeast. That's still where rail is most developed because of this kind of early start. It really creates this opportunity for mobility, for women to move around the country. These are a couple women taking transcontinental rail on their own. So as a young woman in this period of time, previously bound to the farm and to farm labor, you now can, on only a few months' wages, afford to get just about anywhere in the country. And so these are a couple young women talking about their experiences. She says, I'd go anywhere in God's world for a job away from that farm. She rode away to Kansas City, and within a few weeks I had a railroad pass. And she went out to work for the Fred Harvey Company, which provided services in localities at stops along the rail lines. But these kind of opportunities began to crop up for women. So women have the potential to move, the potential to choose. So now if you can couple that potential to choose different jurisdictions to live in with a political system that allows different jurisdictions to establish different laws, then you can get something that's a little bit like a competitive market. So we don't need just women able to choose, we also need federalism. We need a decentralized political system that enables states and territories to actually change and offer different family and property law provisions. We have that in the United States in the 19th century. So we can have a lot of debates about whether or not federalism has much robustness left today. But in this period of time, you have not only federalism, but you have the drive for American expansionism. So many of the governors who were in charge of managing governments in the territorial parts of the western United States were ex-military, appointed by the president and by the Treasury to go out and run these very small, sometimes less than 25 people in the entire government kind of operations. And their job, get population up so we can get this state into the United States of America. We got to keep it away from the Mexicans. We got to keep it away from the Spanish and the French. So you get that drive coupled with the opportunity of a federal system. And one thing these governors really hit on as a potential opportunity for them is, hey, we got to get women out here. And one of the reasons why it's so important to get women to move out to the frontier is that early in frontier history, it's a man's game. So it's almost all military and explorers. The first census of Denver had a female population of only 5%. So I don't know how far you guys got in your biology sequences, but 5% women is not going to work for robust population growth. So you see, these are both territorial governors. J.M. Ashley in Montana, he speaks about the renewal of labor, how good the wages are, how good the conditions are. Colorado and Nevada, that's William Gilpin. He speaks about this great blessing. And there are literally hundreds of these kinds of advertisements that appear in publications that get circulated around the country in the 19th century. Go west, young girl. In Texas, they'll pay $20 a month. Garfield County, California has 1,100 unmarried men and 28 unmarried women. Go west, girls. And my favorite one for the sheer drama of it, for humanity's sake and a mutual benefit to the race and to both sections of the country, do, Mr. Editor, earnestly recommend the emigration from down east of a few thousand virtuous and industrious young ladies. All right, so you have robust competition that's operating on both sides. You have women who are free to choose where they want to live, coupled with a political system that allows local change in laws and local political competition. The result is what we see when we look at that map of where women's economic rights are protected in the 20th century. A dramatic change from what the situation had been in 1800, by the time we get to 1900. All right. So one final lesson that I think is very important from the history of the American experience to thinking about how freedoms and how economic rights can be expanded and can come to be greater protected. And that's that key figures actually have to believe that economic rights matter for women and to women. So those quotes I just read from the territorial governors, they're circulating in the newspapers. It's not going to work as a carrot to attract women to that part of the country if there's not an understanding that economic rights are going to be important for me and vital for me. So you need to have that ingredient too of the beliefs needing to match. So we know, we've already seen some of these statements, so we already know that politicians believed that there was value into being more liberal. So this is another territorial governor. There are many things that can be done and must be done to secure immigration. We should be preeminently liberal in politics, in religion, and in social matters. Reformers believed it. So this is a photograph of Susan B. Anthony, and to her left are her parents, Daniel and Lucy Anthony. And Daniel and Lucy Anthony were also very actively involved in reform. Daniel Anthony did a lot of work with Frederick Douglass. He was a Quaker and was involved in all kinds of reform movements. But one of the ventures that Daniel Anthony engaged in for a period of time was running a textile mill. So he opened and operated 2 different textile mills in Pennsylvania at different points in time. And one of Susan B. Anthony's early exposures to women and to their capacity was seeing the women who came to work in these textile mills and how capable and how responsible they were. So she's being told by her father, okay, you can't become a lawyer. Law schools don't admit women. That was what she originally wanted to do. She wanted to get that level of education and pursue that kind of path. She's being told she can't do it because she's not as capable and not as intelligent as men. But she's surrounded by capable and intelligent women, and so the message is just not jiving. The cognitive dissonance is too great. And so that motivation winds up being the impetus for a lot of her other famous reform work that we're familiar with her from. And we also know women believed it. So this is another quote from one of the Lowell Offering magazine, that publication that was written and edited by women. And this is one of the mill workers writing that women have an indefeasible and inalienable right to buy and sell, solicit and refuse, choose and reject, as have men. And these propositions we are prepared to defend, and while we have mind, talent, acquisition, ability, and a pen, we will defend them. So this mattered to politicians, to reformers, and to women. And by the way, I don't know what this woman's situation is, but she's well aware of the fact that her husband, even if he is a total deadbeat and has been gone and not supporting the family at all, and he disappeared a decade ago, if he comes back, he can take everything that she's earned in that period of time because of his economic rights, if her economic rights are not now protected and she doesn't have that equal legal recognition. So I think this recipe of greater economic opportunity, of legal choice, and of a set of ideas that really matter is something that we can think about in the context of other groups and in other parts of the world. So how can we think about how these ideas might help other groups that are being held back and currently denied the ability to be the authors of their lives? So just a quick overview of the status of women's economic rights around the world. Over half of countries prohibit women from working in particular occupations. In 18 countries, husbands are legally able to deny their wives from working at all. So no permission to work. And over a third of countries restrict women's freedom to be able to choose where they want to live, often through the form of needing to get your husband's permission to get a passport and to leave the country. So around the world, we are still systematically denying women that access to economic opportunity and that access to choice over where they'd like to live. I won't go into great detail on this because I do want to wrap up, but this leads to great productivity losses from leaving so many women and so many great potential contributions out of the workforce. And so if we really want to think about translating this and making change, we need to think about increasing economic opportunity to women living in these countries, making it easier for them to choose where they want to live by crossing borders, and not forgetting when we have these conversations about the status of women around the world, that economic rights are a key and important ingredient for them to be able to exercise their fundamental human rights. All right, thank you very much. I think there's time for a couple questions if folks have any.
Do you mind going back to the slide with the different countries?
Oh, sure. Of course.
So, okay, this is
So the basic idea here is that there are 40 countries who sacrifice between 15 and 30% of their GDP every year by not admitting women into the workforce. This is from an IMF study.
Do you know how the labor of women was valued? Was it valued at probably equal market wages for men?
I'd have to go back and look at the study.
Okay, well, I mean, it should be, but, okay, that was my question.
Yes.
Do you think that some of the early ones that we put in our can very
Early had to do with some of the political activities like prohibition that was happening then, that women were so involved, and then that maybe gained some respect, and that also led to the states' rights being different?
Yeah, so the idea of women being actively engaged in other kinds of political activity.
Right.
Yeah, that matters very much. And so along the frontier, women not only get earlier economic rights, but they also get easier access to being able to divorce without having to be abused for a long period of time first. Wyoming and Utah are the first states to extend women the right to vote. But also, maybe more directly to your question, it is a bit of a myth that women are completely politically enfranchised without the vote. In fact, it's actually an outrageous myth. Because women are really heavily involved in this period of time, especially along the frontier where strong governments are not yet established. It's actually women's clubs and associations and community activities that are providing much of the local public goods. They're doing the schools, they're doing the care for the aged, they're doing kind of community betterment and beautification programs. So yeah, I do think that civil society activity by women that was particularly vibrant along the frontier, but also in the Northeast earlier in time, I think that kind of activity absolutely sets the foundation and can be a great proving ground where women can develop and demonstrate skills as well.
And so that could be a lesson going forward too for some of these other countries, is to work first on maybe some of those other civil activities, and then hope for economic freedoms to come from that as well.
I think I'm going to add that to my slides for the next time. All right, thank you. I think.
Let me just ask you one quick question. On your chart again, if I looked at it, because it looked like a lot of them are countries that are Muslim countries, do you think, I mean, you mentioned it was some religious, how is that going to change if it's embedded in their religion?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. Probably more questions than answers in this area. But I do think there are a lot of examples that we can look at, women who have come out of Muslim countries, and also, not every Islamic country faces these barriers. A lot of it is in, much more problematic in the highly politically centralized ones. So I think access to the external world, enabling people to emigrate and to then get on, British television and have that be seen back in the Middle East. Oh wow, someone from my, a woman from my country can be incredibly successful as a reporter, as a thinker, as a speaker. So I think that kind of movement of people and ideas is probably the best recipe for people who want to leave a religious situation to be able to.
Thank you, Jayme. Thanks.